There's a memory system so powerful that monks have used it for 800 years to memorize thousands of characters without forgetting a single one. And today, you'll discover why every stroke of a brush rewires your brain in ways that modern education completely ignores. Have you ever wondered how ancient scholars could memorize entire texts, thousands of kanji characters, complex poetry, all without flashcards, apps, or memory tricks? The answer isn't what you think. It has nothing to do with being naturally gifted. It has everything to do with something they did every single morning, something that looked like art, but was actually the most sophisticated memory training system ever created. They called it Shodo, the way of writing. And when you understand what's really happening in your brain when you practice calligraphy, you realize that everything you've been taught about memory is backwards. But there's a catch. This system only works if you're willing to do something that feels completely wrong at first, something your modern brain will resist with everything it has. Before I show you exactly how this works, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss future content. Thank you very much for your attention. Back to the video. Let me tell you about a man named David. He was 34 years old, a software engineer in Silicon Valley, and he had a problem that was destroying his confidence. He couldn't remember anything, not in the sense of memory loss or disease, but in the way that matters for modern life. He'd read a book and forget it within weeks. He'd learn a new programming language and need to constantly look things up. He'd meet someone at a conference and forget their name within minutes. His wife would tell him something important, and it would vanish from his mind by evening. David tried everything. Spaced repetition apps, memory palaces, mnemonic devices, nootropics, meditation apps. He read every book on memory improvement. He practiced visualization techniques. Nothing stuck. The information would enter his brain and leak right back out like water through a sieve. Then one day, he was scrolling through social media and saw a video of an elderly Japanese man practicing calligraphy. The movements were slow, deliberate, almost meditative. The brush moved across the paper with absolute precision, creating characters that seemed to breathe. Something about it caught David's attention, not because it looked relaxing, but because of what the man said. When you write with a brush, you're not creating art. You're training your brain to never forget. David was skeptical. How could writing with a brush improve memory? But he was desperate enough to try anything. He ordered a basic calligraphy set online, cheap brush, ink stick, practice paper. When it arrived, he had no idea what he was doing. He tried to copy a simple character he found online. It took him 15 minutes and looked terrible. His hand shook. The lines were uneven, the proportions were wrong. It was frustrating, but something strange happened. 2 weeks later, he could still remember that character perfectly. Not just what it looked like, but every stroke, every movement his hand had made, the feeling of the brush on paper. He couldn't explain why, but that single character was burned into his memory in a way that nothing else ever had been. What David didn't know was that he had accidentally activated something that neuroscientists are only now beginning to understand. Something that the Japanese discovered centuries ago through pure observation and practice. When you write with a brush, you're not just moving your hand, you're engaging a neural network so complex and interconnected that it literally rewires your brain's ability to form and retain memories. Let me explain exactly what's happening inside your skull when you practice calligraphy, and why it's the most powerful memory training tool you've never heard of. Your brain has several systems for creating memory. There's declarative memory, the kind you use when you memorize facts and information. This is what most memory techniques focus on. Then there's motor memory, the kind your body uses when you learn to ride a bike or play an instrument. Most people think these are separate systems. They're not. When you practice calligraphy, you're creating what neuroscientists call multimodal memory encoding. You're not just seeing the character. You're feeling it in your muscles. You're planning each stroke in your motor cortex. You're coordinating fine movements in your cerebellum. You're tracking spatial relationships in your parietal lobe. You're encoding the sequence in your basal ganglia. Every part of your brain that deals with memory is firing simultaneously. A researcher at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology used high-density EEG to map brain activity during handwriting. What they found was revolutionary. When people wrote by hand, especially with traditional tools like brushes, their brains showed widespread theta and alpha connectivity patterns between the parietal and central regions. These are the exact frequency patterns that are crucial for memory formation and encoding new information. When the same people typed on a keyboard, these patterns didn't appear. The brain stayed relatively quiet. The information went in, but it didn't stick. The physical act of forming letters by hand creates neural networks that typing simply cannot replicate. But calligraphy takes this to another level entirely. Here's what makes calligraphy different from just regular handwriting. When you write with a brush, every stroke requires absolute precision. The angle of the brush, the pressure you apply, the speed of movement, the direction of the stroke, all of these variables must be controlled simultaneously. Your brain can't coast on autopilot. It has to be fully present for every single movement. This intense focus activates your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for attention and conscious thought. But here's where it gets interesting. As you repeat the same character over and over, something shifts. The conscious effort starts to fade. The movements become smoother, more automatic. Your hand seems to know where to go before your mind decides. This is motor memory taking over. The cerebellum, a region at the back of your brain, is the master coordinator of all motor learning. When you repeat a movement 300 to 500 times with focused attention, the cerebellum begins creating an automated pattern. By the time you've done it 1,000 times correctly, that pattern becomes unconscious. The movement literally migrates from your conscious mind to your brain's automatic systems. But here's the crucial part that makes calligraphy so powerful for memory. Unlike typing or even regular writing, calligraphy requires you to draw each character as a complete, unique entity. You can't just scribble it quickly. You have to think about the structure, the balance, the proportion, the order of strokes. This forces your brain to engage with the information at multiple levels simultaneously. Visual, spatial, motor, sequential, all at once. There's a concept in traditional Shodo called Mushin, which translates to no mind or empty mind. Western students often misunderstand this. They think it means turning off your brain, becoming mindless. That's backwards. Mushin is what happens when the conscious, deciding, negotiating part of your mind gets out of the way, and your trained, automatic systems take over. It's the state where your hand moves before you think, where the character flows through you rather than being constructed by you. Reaching Mushin isn't about becoming stupid. It's about becoming so skilled that expertise becomes effortless. And here's the secret that ancient calligraphers understood intuitively. When you reach this state, when the movement becomes automatic, that's when memory becomes permanent. Your brain has essentially hardwired the information directly into your motor cortex. Let me give you an example of how powerful this is. David, after 3 months of daily practice, could write about 80 basic kanji characters from memory. But here's what surprised him. He didn't just remember what they looked like, he could feel them. If someone showed him a character, he could immediately sense how it would feel to write it, which stroke came first, where the difficult parts were, how the balance shifted as you moved through it. The information wasn't stored as an abstract image in his visual memory. It was stored as a complete sensory experience throughout his entire brain. This is multimodal encoding at its finest. A study published in the journal Frontiers in Psychology examined what happens in the brain when people practice Japanese calligraphy. They found that Shodo activates both the creative and analytical parts of the brain simultaneously. The right hemisphere, associated with spatial awareness and holistic thinking, lights up as you perceive the character as a complete form. The left hemisphere, responsible for sequential processing and analysis, activates as you break down the character stroke by stroke. Most activities favor one hemisphere over the other. Calligraphy demands both work together in perfect coordination. This bilateral brain activation is incredibly rare and incredibly powerful for memory formation. But there's another layer that makes this even more effective. The basal ganglia, deep structures in your brain, are responsible for habit formation and the automation of learned behaviors. When you practice calligraphy with consistent repetition, the basal ganglia begin taking over from your conscious mind. At first, every stroke requires deliberate thought and effort. After weeks of practice, your basal ganglia have learned the pattern so thoroughly that the movements happen automatically. This is the same system that allows you to drive a car while having a conversation or walk while thinking about something else. Once the basal ganglia encode a skill, it becomes nearly permanent. This is why people say you never forget how to ride a bike. The memory isn't stored in your conscious mind where it can fade. It's embedded in the deep motor structures of your brain. Traditional Shodo masters understood this instinctively. That's why they insisted on perfect repetition of basic strokes, thousands of times, before moving to complex characters. They weren't being traditional for tradition's sake. They were exploiting the brain's natural learning mechanisms. The repetition wasn't about muscle memory in your hand. It was about creating neural pathways in your cerebellum and basal ganglia that would last a lifetime. Modern neuroscience has proven them right. The interregional connections between the cerebellum, basal ganglia, and motor cortex strengthen dramatically with repeated practice. The connection from the cerebellum to the motor area actually weakens over time because you need less error correction. The connection from the basal ganglia to the motor area strengthens because the automated program is taking over. David continued practicing every morning, 20 minutes before work, sitting at his desk with his brush and ink. He'd choose 3 characters to practice, 50 repetitions of each. Some days it felt meditative, other days it felt tedious, but he never stopped. After 6 months, something remarkable happened. His memory in other areas of his life began improving dramatically. He could remember conversations with his wife word for word. He'd read a technical article and retain the key points weeks later. He'd meet someone once and remember their name months after. At first, he thought it was a coincidence. Then he realized what was happening. The neural networks he was building through calligraphy weren't just for remembering characters. They were general-purpose memory enhancement systems. By training his brain to create those widespread connectivity patterns, those theta and alpha frequency synchronizations, he was literally increasing his brain's baseline capacity for forming and storing memories. There's something else that happens when you practice calligraphy that modern education completely misses. When you write by hand, especially with a brush, you slow down. You can't rush through it. You can't skim or speed read. You're forced to engage with each element of what you're learning at a pace that allows deep encoding. Modern life trains us to consume information as fast as possible. Read faster, learn faster, process more. But the brain doesn't work that way. Memory formation requires time. It requires the information to be held in working memory long enough for the synaptic changes to occur. When you spend 5 minutes carefully writing a single character, you're giving your brain the time it needs to actually encode that information permanently. A researcher at Kyoto University, who studied motor learning for 18 years, found that when you repeat a specific movement with focused attention, the brain requires approximately 66 days for the behavior to become truly automatic. But here's the key: it has to be the same movement in the same context with the same level of attention. This is why traditional Shodo practice is so rigid. Same time every day, same posture, same materials, same sequence of strokes. They weren't being inflexible. They were creating the perfect conditions for neural consolidation. David's transformation didn't stop at memory. His coworkers started noticing something different about him. He seemed calmer, more focused. In meetings, while everyone else was frantically taking notes on laptops, he'd write a few key points by hand. Later, he'd remember the entire discussion while others needed to review their notes. His manager asked him directly, "What are you doing differently? You seem sharper." David tried to explain about the calligraphy practice, but it sounded absurd when he said it out loud. "I write Japanese characters with a brush every morning, and somehow that makes me remember everything better." People looked at him like he was crazy, but it worked. That was undeniable. There's a deeper principle at work here that connects to everything we've discussed on this channel. The ancient systems, whether it's the discipline of Ninpo, the mastery principles of Shuhari, the unshakable mindset of Musashi, they all share something in common. They all use the body to train the mind. Modern education tries to teach purely through intellectual understanding. Read, memorize, understand, repeat. But the most profound learning happens when you engage your entire nervous system. When you practice calligraphy, you're not just studying characters. You're teaching your cerebellum, your motor cortex, your basal ganglia, your parietal lobe, your prefrontal cortex, all working together in perfect synchronization. This is whole brain learning. This is how human beings are designed to acquire and retain information permanently. The masters who developed Shodo weren't thinking about neuroscience or brain plasticity. They were simply observing what worked. They noticed that monks who practiced calligraphy daily could memorize vast amounts of text. They observed that students who learned through writing retained information better than those who only read. They discovered through centuries of trial and refinement that the physical act of forming characters with precision and attention created something extraordinary. It created minds that didn't forget. And now modern neuroscience is catching up and confirming what they knew all along. So here's what I want you to understand. Memory isn't a gift some people have and others don't. It's not about having a photographic memory or being naturally smart. Memory is a skill, and like any skill, it can be trained, but not through the methods you've been taught, not through flashcards and mnemonic devices and memory palaces. Those work to a degree, but they're working against your brain's natural learning systems. Calligraphy works with them. When you write with a brush, you're hacking directly into the motor learning pathways that evolution designed to be permanent. You're creating multimodal memory traces that involve vision, touch, movement, sequence, and spatial awareness all at once. You're forcing your brain to slow down and actually encode information instead of just briefly storing it. You're building the neural infrastructure for superior memory that will last your entire life. David is still practicing 2 years later. He's now learning Chinese calligraphy as well. He's memorized over 500 characters. But more importantly, his memory in every other area of his life is better than it's ever been. He reads books and remembers them. He learns new skills and retains them. He has conversations and recalls them perfectly. People ask him how he has such a good memory. He tells them about the calligraphy. Most people don't try it. They want a quick fix, an app, a technique they can implement in 5 minutes. They don't want to sit down every morning and slowly, carefully form characters with a brush. It sounds tedious. It sounds old-fashioned. It sounds like it wouldn't work. That's exactly why it does work. Because the things that seem too simple, too slow, too traditional, those are often the things that actually change your brain at a fundamental level. The question is, are you willing to try something that feels completely backwards to everything modern education taught you? Are you willing to slow down instead of speed up? Are you willing to engage your body instead of just your mind? Are you willing to spend 20 minutes every morning training your brain in a way that actually works? If you are, I'll tell you what to do. Get a basic calligraphy set. You don't need expensive materials. A simple brush, ink, and practice paper are enough. Choose 3 basic characters. Don't start with complex ones. Start simple. Practice each character 20 times every morning. Same time, same place, same focused attention. Count the repetitions. Pay attention to every stroke. Notice the pressure of the brush, the angle, the movement of your wrist. Don't rush. Don't try to make it perfect. Just pay attention and repeat. Do this every day for 66 days. Not 65 days, not 67 days. 66 consecutive days without a single gap. After 66 days, test your memory. Test it in ways that matter to you. Read something and try to recall it a week later. Learn a new skill and see how much you retain. Have a conversation and remember it perfectly days after. You'll be shocked at what happens. Because here's what the ancient masters knew and what modern science is now confirming. The brush is not creating art. The brush is creating brain pathways. The ink is not making beauty on paper. The ink is encoding information directly into your motor cortex. The repetition is not about discipline or meditation. The repetition is about consolidating neural networks that make forgetting nearly impossible. Calligraphy isn't art disguised as memory training. It's memory training disguised as art. The masters let people think it was about aesthetics and beauty because that's easier to accept than the truth. The truth that every stroke is rewiring your brain. Every character is creating permanent memory traces. Every session is literally growing new neural connections that will serve you for the rest of your life. So here's my invitation. If you've watched this far, you're one of the few people willing to consider that ancient wisdom might actually be more advanced than modern techniques. You're one of the few people who understands that the path to extraordinary results often looks exactly opposite to what everyone else is doing. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the other ancient systems we'll be revealing. Like this video if you're actually going to try this, and comment below which 3 characters you're going to start with. When you make that public declaration, you've just made it real, you've just committed. And 66 days from now, you'll look back at this moment as the day everything changed. The day you stopped trying to trick your brain with shortcuts and started actually training it properly. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for your attention. Until the next video.